this is just the way I talk when I'm not on the microphone. Normally I talk like this, because I'm Dan, and this is Josh, and we're here for another fun episode of Show Me Your Setup.
We're kind of in the middle of a series of setups. We're attempting to achieve professional audio quality.
I'm going to dive into that one right now and say, in episode 3, we talked about trying to sound like a professional when you're recording. And what I meant to say is try to make your recordings sound like they were done in a professional vocal booth. Because when you record in a professional vocal booth, you don't get a lot of room tone. It's designed specifically to eliminate room tone, to give you a very neutral, somewhat flat, almost muted read, to give you that proximity, that intimacy, and to allow the engineer to do whatever in post-production is necessary to fit the mood, but you really want a fairly dry sound when you're in the recording booth. In a room, it's going to sound different. So in episode 3, we showed a handy little hack that we call a Recordin Box. And the Recordin Box was a little booth for the microphone. So you put the microphone in the booth, and when you speak into the booth, it sounds like you're recording in a booth, even though it's not. It's a small box, a Recordin Box. Now, another product that does a similar thing, such that it eliminates some of the reflected room tone or the reverberation that's being picked up by the microphone, is the Sterling VMS, which we'll show you today.
And you can buy it. You don't have to make it. You don't have to assemble it.
That's right. This is the Sterling VMS.
So why don't you describe the metal side?
One side, it appears to be aluminum. It's perforated. And the reason for the perforations is the voice mic, I'm going to say mic, because when I say microphone, it just takes a lot of time. So if I abbreviate to mic, people, don't be offended. I'm talking about microphone when I say mic. So the voice mic shield, or the voice microphone shield, shouldn't reflect any sound back. And if this was solid metal on the back side, then the sounds hitting from this side, some would be reflected back. The perforations allow the sound to come through. The foam, which is acoustic treatment foam, you can see it's a little curved and it's got some level of density. That's to eliminate the reflected noises that are hitting it head on. So when I speak into it, that sound gets somewhat absorbed and other parts of it get passed through, such that none of it from the room comes back into the backside of the microphone. But also, because my voice is going out in all directions, we need to be somewhat inside this to keep my voice, again, from reverberating around the room, because the microphone picks up in this direction, while this microphone picks up in this direction. Any of my speech bouncing off something behind me is going to come back. Luckily for me in this situation, what's behind me is an angled ceiling, another part of angled, so those reflections aren't necessarily going to reflect straight back at me, nor form standing waves. Next, I'll move the microphone into position to test the VMS. You will see that once it's in position, my mouth will be approximately the same distance away from the front of the microphone as the VMS will be behind the microphone. This will allow my voice to pass into the microphone, past the microphone, and then be diffused, absorbed, and otherwise not reflected back by the VMS, nor will the speech passing through the VMS come from the wall behind it into the mic, because it too is going to be blocked by the VMS.
Well, you're about to mount it on a mic stand, and you're about to show us how it sounds, and then you're going to demonstrate how it sounds without it for a true A/B test. And we're going to hope to hear some difference, and we're going to see how capable the VMS is at giving you a more professional room tone, or lack of room tone. The Recordin Box did a great job. How well will the VMS do?
And is that what the VMS is really even for? We'll answer all these questions by the end of today's episode. Well, the folks at home like to know what we're doing. Let me describe the situation for everybody. I'm standing in front of an arrangement of gear that I call a setup. What's a setup, you might wonder? Well, a setup is any kind of equipment that you set up in order to record audio. In this case, I'm going to record some tongue twisters. For those in the listening audience, let me give you a visual breakdown of what's in front of me. Between my mouth and the microphone is a pop filter. Then there's the microphone itself. The microphone is mounted in a strange apparatus that Josh will want us to describe later, but let's just call it a shock mount. And behind the shock mount, behind the microphone, is the Sterling VMS, which is either a voice microphone shield or a vocal microphone shield, depending on when you got involved with the Sterling product in front of me. In order to explain how this thing works, we're just going to let our ears do the listening later, because we're going to record in this setup, in this arrangement, with and without the voice microphone shield. And we're going to see if we hear any difference in the sound of the room by way of my voice. Tongue twisters that we can repeat in the future in multiple recording environments. How much do and how loud am I? Am I too loud or is that just fine? I can't tell. Let me turn down my own headphones. There we go. How much do could a dewdrop do? And that's why they're called tongue twisters, everyone. Because you trip your tongue when you're talking. How much dew could a dewdrop drop if a dewdrop did drop dew? Betty bought some bitter butter, and it made her batter bitter, so Betty bought some better butter to make her bitter batter better. A skunk sat on a stump, and thunk, the stump stunk. But the stump thunk, the skunk stunk. If two witches watched two watches, which witch would watch which watch? And by the way, Fuzzy Wuzzy was a bear, Fuzzy Wuzzy had no hair, Fuzzy Wuzzy wasn't very fuzzy, was he? Once again, these are tongue twisters. Why did we say them? One, it's a vocal warm-up technique. It's really handy when you have to get your mouth warmed up to say all kinds of awkward text, like if you're doing professional voice recordings. On the other hand, if you just want to sound like you know how you're talking, maybe you do these tongue twisters before you start recording your podcast episode. And also, in this case, I particularly like the one with Betty bought some bitter butter and it made her batter bitter. So Betty bought some better butter to make her bitter batter better because it's full of B's. And B's, like peas, can be very plosive. And if you take away the pop filter and you say Betty bought some bitter butter and it made her batter bitter, maybe there's some plosive P's in there. But I can't tell because I'm not really picking up any today. Maybe I'm not close enough to the microphone, people. Maybe I should be up here. What do we think?
Yeah.
Oh, there's some plosive. Now let's put the thing back. All right, Betty bought some bitter butter and it made her batter bitter. So maybe my gain's too high, but my plosives have gone away.
Uh-huh.
Is the gain too high?
Yeah.
All right, let's adjust it. How much dew could a dewdrop drop if a dewdrop did drop dew? So we want to be about that far apart most of the time. So that's about here. So if I put that here and I get right up on here, that's as close as I really need to get. Also, I think the mic is a little low. The more I look at it.
The first thing you want to do is get comfortable, right? And then adjust your equipment if you can around your comfort.
Yes, what Josh said. The first thing you want to do in any vocal situation is make sure you're comfortable and then adjust everything else to fit.
It's just going to say you may have to slow down and think about these things instead of just hopping right to it.
I can sense an upcoming episode wherein Josh and I go over protocol for preparing to record. All the things one might want to do in order to be ready to be present on mic to give one fluid take without any mistakes, such that the editor can go home early. How much dew could a dewdrop drop if a dewdrop did drop dew? Betty bought some bitter butter, and it made her batter bitter, so Betty bought some better butter to make her bitter batter better. If two witches watched two watches, which witch would watch which watch? Okay, so those are three tongue twisters with a pop filter. We'll pull it aside to do Betty bought one more time. Betty bought some bitter butter, and it made her batter bitter. Folks, we've read tongue twisters recorded with the VMS behind the microphone at whatever volume I was speaking. What we're going to do now is remove the VMS and see if you can hear anything differently. If I leave that and I just do that, everyone can see that it's off to the side, but no longer doing anything for me. How much dew could a dewdrop drop if a dewdrop did drop dew? Betty bought some bitter butter, and it made her batter bitter, so Betty bought some better butter to make her bitter batter better. If two witches watched two watches, which witch would watch which watch? And those tongue twisters were done without the VMS behind the microphone. Now, do we hear any difference? And why do we, and why don't we? We'll get into that once I'm facing that way.
We're about to discuss the results of Dan's A/B test, but first I want to remind you that you're listening to Show Me Your Setup. We would love to hear from you. We would love to even feature you on the show. We'd love to hear about your recording setups, your computing stations, hacks that you've put together to make things easy for yourself and to be more productive. Some great ways to reach us are on social media. You can hit us up on our Twitter account at GoModPod. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/GoModPod. Our YouTube channel, where you can watch video versions of these episodes, is youtube.com/@GoModPod. And we always encourage you to subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the audio version. And you can find our RSS feed at our website, gomodpod.com. We're back, and Dan has completed 2 separate recordings with and without the VMS. How do the two compare?
I hardly heard any difference at all. Did you hear much difference, Josh?
I didn't hear much difference.
And let's talk about why that is. The Sterling VMS was designed with vocal reflections in mind. Those reflections are caused when your voice travels across the room and reflects off surfaces and back into the microphone slightly later than your direct speech into the microphone. This creates audible reverberations that would not be present in a vocal booth. So what is the Sterling VMS really good for? Well, I've learned that it's really, really good for singing vocals in a room where there are other people present playing music. Because you want to isolate that vocal, but that musician still has to be present with the rest of the band to collaborate, to feel the energy of the room, to get the vibe. And so if each singer has a VMS, they can get kind of intimate with their microphone. They don't need to have any copy in front of them because they tend to know the music pretty well. And therefore, the visual barrier of the VMS isn't a problem, as it would be if I was doing long form narration, because I can't hold copy here if there's a big solid thing in the way. And I can't hold the copy in front of that because it defeats the purpose, because the copy itself is kind of a reflective surface. So, what is the VMS really good for? Vocals. Singing vocals. In a room with other musicians. I think the Sterling VMS excels in the capacity of working in a confined space with musicians where one vocalist needs to be somewhat isolated from the rest of the band to get a better signal from their microphone. Does that make it good for our purposes, for podcasting? Not necessarily. I'm pretty sure if you had two people in a small room, each with a VMS, and their mics were up pretty loud, the VMS would do very little. It would not necessarily eliminate the room tone. It certainly wouldn't block out the sound of the other speaker. So I'm not sure it's an optimal solution for somebody who wants to do a podcast from a loud environment that sounds like they would also sound in a professional vocal booth. Some of the nice features of the VMS are, as you said, it can be easily attached to a mic stand. So you could have the microphone mounted here. If you didn't have a huge elaborate microphone connection such as I'm using today, you could have the microphone mounted right here. I could demonstrate this by way of a microphone. So that's there. And now this piece in the back, this slides forward and backwards to get nice and close and further back. So it's about 10 inches of play, sliding it forward and backwards. So you can get the VMS really close to the back of the microphone if you have the right mic and mic clamp. In that respect, it's very adjustable, whereas the Recordin box was just simply a cable hanging. Now, we could use a mic stand in the Recordin box and position the mic absolutely anywhere we wanted to. We just didn't in our application last episode.
So I have tons of questions, and I know people watching are going to have tons of questions. That is an amazing spring mount. It's not exactly a shock mount. It's doing some of the capabilities of a shock mount. What is going on here? What are we looking at? This is amazing. It looks steampunk.
This thing, this contraption here that I've got suspending my MXL 990 large diaphragm condenser microphone, we're talking about this doohickey. Well, Josh, you're a dad. You have kids, right?
Yes.
I also have kids. My kids were involved in theater from a very young age. And when you have theater kids, at some point in time, you're going to get a little tap on the shoulder that says, "Hey, Dan, could you maybe help make some props for that play that we're working on? You know, we're doing a version of Annie, and we need some studio microphones that look realistic and old-timey, like from the Depression era." I said, "Let me see what I can do." So the old-timey microphones, as I understood it, was you had the microphone element in the middle suspended on these coils in a hoop. Well, anyways, I took this studio prop, and I punched a hole through the middle, and I mounted the microphone to it, put the whole thing on a mic stand, and now I've got a shock mount in air quotes, because a real shock mount these days usually doesn't use metal springs. It uses a much quieter membrane, more of an elastic polymer, I don't know, stretchy things, but not metal dingy. So I think this kind of can transmit noise of its own while it's mounted this way. If I'm pounding on the desk, it's not too loud. If I'm stepping on the floor, it's not too bad, but it's also not perfect. And it looks cool.
It sure does.
Of course, it doesn't let the VMS get quite as close as it could. Yep. So some of the results of the VMS might be compromised by the fact that I'm using an outrageously large shock mount for my microphone.
We should mention the microphone we used for the Recordin box and today for the VMS is your MXL 990 home studio recording microphone, a large diaphragm condenser, because you want to be able to pick up room tone for comparison's sake, to show how the products can lessen that room tone.
Exactly. As Josh is pointing out, normally when I'm at work at my desk and I'm communicating with my team, I'm on a dynamic microphone, which is not as sensitive to the sounds of the room. It's much more focused on just me, doesn't pick up a lot of extra room sound. Yes, for these tests, as Josh said, we're using the MXL 990 large diaphragm condenser microphone because it picks up more sounds than my Electro Voice M600. I'm like, is that what I use? I don't even know. It is. It's up there. Microphones. How many do you have? Can you count them on one hand? That's not nearly enough. That's like only having one bicycle or even just two bicycles. It's not enough, people. You should have probably 4 or 5 bicycles and maybe a dozen or more microphones. Not good microphones. You only need like 1 or 2 good microphones, but you should have lots of microphones just to play.
Why don't we talk a little bit about what we do for our day jobs?
You first. For my day job, I interrupt Josh when he's talking. I'm really good at it. He'll start to say something and I'll just barge right in and I'll talk right over him. And he'll be like, Dan, I was about to speak, but he won't say that because he's too polite. And then I just get to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk.
Well, I was wondering if you wanted to...
Let me do a tongue twister for you. It's called, How Do We Keep Josh from Barging In? Well, first, we never stop talking. Second, we continue to talk. And third, we start to sing. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Oh, amen.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Oh, you were saying something?
Dan, before we go, I want you to have a blessed day. And we work at ModPod. We produce branded podcasts for businesses. We facilitate others recording their own podcasts. We edit podcasts. We help plan podcasts. If you're in the market for such services, you can visit us at gomodpod.com and set up a meeting. As we wind down episode 4, what can we look forward to in episode 5? Are we going to have a further tour?
Going into a professional vocal booth, because we keep talking about the tone or the sound of pro audio, the sound of a professional voice booth. Let's go into a professional voice booth with the MXL 990 and see what we can do.
It's cool that we actually have Dan, who happens to be a professional voice talent.
I'm ModPod's professional ham. They call me Captain Cheeseball because I'm cornier than you are. We'd love to hear some feedback from episode 3 or even episode 4 that you're watching or listening to right now. Folks at home who are listening to us, feel free to drop a comment. There's lots of ways to reach us. You're listening to us somehow, which means you've got a description you can read, and there are links to all our socials in that description. Subscribe! Don't miss out! New episodes come out whenever they do. Folks, if you want to reach out directly to us, please email info@gomodpod.com. In your subject line, say, show me your setup, or just SMYS, we love you.
What is the mic actually sitting in?
Well, I'm sure you could probably figure it out if you looked at it up close and personal. It's very familiar to anyone who likes tuna fish. It's a tuna can.
Or has cats.
This metal can was a can of tuna fish.
And then you screwed hooks right through the can
to
hold the springs.
You're going to lose my speech a little bit, but I'll show you the visual.
The can's not going anywhere. Therefore, the mic isn't going anywhere.
Correct. We can hang it upside down, put it at an angle, we can twist it, we can turn it, we can move it any which way we want, and it's floating nicely in its little space, in a little happy zone. It's like a bobblehead.
I love that you brought up a point of interest to our video. And folks who are listening to the audio version, definitely go to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@gomodpod, because we enjoy being on video.
Yeah, it's really not going anywhere at all, man. Look at this. That's it for episode 4. I'm Dan, this is Josh, and we're showing you our setups. If you think I'm making fun of you, do something about it, punk, because I don't really care.
You're not going to do anything.
What are you going to do? You going to come and get me? Come on. Come on my show. Well, show me your setup, too. I bet it's cool.